In fact, not only that, it's not even important to know at the end did they believe or not. And and God doesn't share that information with them, or with us rather. Now, paradigm principle 3: strike a balance between privately discoursing on faith and being in a position of public leadership or public involvement. So Joseph's example is one that when he seeks his position of power and he's engaged by the king as a minister and he's in this public position of leadership, he performs a lot of public services. He saves Egyptian society from famine, and not only Egyptian society but the neighboring regions from famine. And yet, in so doing, we never find an example, or God certainly doesn't give an example, of him also speaking about faith when delivering his public duties. But God does at the same time show that Joseph did indeed put a premium, valued sharing with others about faith when engaging in his private capacity. For example, when he was talking with his prison companions, and any number of things like that. So basically showing that the two, being a faithful person, and this is what one thing I thought I'd mention here is, people are free to believe, whether Catholics, whether evangelical Christians, whether Muslims, whoever, on not agreeing on theologically with others, and then speaking their free mind about that in their private capacity, and then distinguishing that from their public role. And so that's the example that you see even given by Prophet Joseph as a normative example for Muslims. Now, the other example that you see, paradigm principle 4, is multiply your impact. Seek public involvement, seek public positions. So you see that Joseph, and this is, obviously now one thing follows from another. Joseph sought public office. He sought that type of public power and public influence. When he was given the opportunity to interpret the dream of the king of the seven, the king had a dream of 7 starving cows, I believe it was, perhaps, someone can correct me, feeding on 7 full cows and so on and so forth. And the king was perplexed, and then he interpreted that dream for him, and then he sought a position of power after he gained the confidence of others that, hey, I'm someone, he says, as the Quran quotes him, I'm trustworthy, I'm knowledgeable, basically trying to earn that position based on capability, saying that you should appoint me given that I am trustworthy, or given that I'm knowledgeable around managing the treasury or the storehouses of the land, as he puts it, and so on and so forth. So he seeks that position. So the lesson there for Muslim civic engagement is that seeking public office is not only Islamically acceptable, but is recommended by prophetic example if it will increase your ability to make positive impact. Now, the other thing that you find there is that going beyond that, the role that Joseph seeks in his society, in his land, is not just for him to seek a position of power in order to do good and so forth, but in even a larger patriotic purpose, which is that he seeks to have Egypt, or historic Egypt, the kingdom of Egypt at that time, play a role in serving the region around it. Because the Quranic narrative of Joseph has that when Joseph gets into power, and then this entire region goes into famine, even beyond Egypt, but reaching out to the other parts of the region, then caravans and trading delegations and others come, and Egypt helps save the entire region from falling into drought and famine. So you find that his role is one of trying to contribute to make Egypt, despite it being a plural democratic society, that one can say to him that, look, this is not your country, you're just a minority here and so forth. But his role is one of helping his country play a role in serving and bettering the entire region. And so by analogy today, the proper Muslim minority, Muslims as a minority as part of the civic democratic experience, is that we would want America to be that similar source of justice and in the world, and wanting that type of role and success for the country. Now the last, actually I missed one principle, and then we'll go to the last. The next is that he engaged, civically engaged, in spite of injustices faced, in order to mend injustice. So Yusuf or Joseph was wrongfully imprisoned. And then he seeks his release through whatever means he has available. He appeals to the king's wine server, and he's unsuccessful there. He appeals to another individual, and he's unsuccessful. But yet, despite that, even in his oppressed situation, he finds opportunities for good works while being in prison. And at the same time, he never tries to avail himself of means to get out of his situation that would compromise his Islamic ethics. And at the same time, when he comes out, his effort is to mend that injustice. So simply because there is injustice, so there's no reason whether Muslims or any other minorities, if they were to experience part of their American experiences and have concerns of injustice, that doesn't justify any other type of action that would, one, compromise Islamic ethics, or two, compromise one's desire to engage in shaping that country to be better. And then the last principle, paradigm principle 7, is to support freedoms of thought and expression. So Joseph's own experience was shaped entirely by his ability, despite the shortcomings of his society, of being wrongfully imprisoned and so forth, was actually he had freedom of expression. I mean, when he was in prison, he was wrongfully imprisoned because he was seen to be a threat to the domestic order, social order, and so forth, but not because of what he was saying, but simply because of the potential scandal he had gotten, or the wife of one of the noblemen had sought to seduce him, and so on and so forth. And so in order to maintain that social order, he was put in prison. But even in prison, he had the opportunity to speak his mind freely, and so he engaged people about faith and about any number of things. And then even when he came out and he was a public leader, we learn in another chapter in the Quran that even then, when he spoke his mind in his private capacity, he had the freedom to do so, even when he was a public figure. And how do we know that? There's a chapter in Arabic, it's called Ghafir, which in Arabic means, I believe, the forgiver. In that, when we move fast forward to the Pharaonic age, in the time of the Pharaoh and Moses, when that story is told in the Quran, what happens is, as Moses is speaking to the Pharaoh and telling him to believe in God, what happens is that it says, the Quran described it as one of the people from the family of the Pharaoh who was hiding his faith in Moses and in God, speaks up and he says, do you not remember ages ago when Joseph also spoke to us, or spoke to society, mentioned to others about faith and so on and so forth. And yet we find that there were no negative consequences for that. So in the time of the kingdom of Egypt, before the Pharaonic age of Egypt, Joseph in that society had that freedom of expression. And so that is something that he benefited from. And indeed, that in the Quran you find celebrated in other places as well, whether it's verses that say things like there's no compulsion in religion, or the very specific Quranic instruction to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by God, that had your Lord willed, and this is a quote from the Quran, saying to the Prophet Muhammad that had your Lord willed, everyone on earth would have believed. Do you then force people to become believers? Sort of asking a rhetorical question that if God wished to have done it, he would have done it. Then it's no place for you to force people, and so on and so forth. So this, was Joseph's experience, certainly, and then you also find it in other places as well. Now, so these different principles of the paradigm provide a very powerful paradigm for me as a practitioner, and certainly I've found in working in our organization, when we frame a lot of the work that we're doing, whether it's in any type of civic engagement or democracy, not that you necessarily require a framing, but when you do frame it, you have a powerful ability to engage people, and then engage people in thinking about their tradition in what is currently in some ways a uniquely American way, but in my hope and indeed in my expectation would not be uniquely American for long.